Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the next episode of How to Get Away with Staffing. My name is Colin LeBeau, president here at FoxHire, which is an employer of record platform in the U.S. We help staffing agencies and HR departments hire contract temp workers and remote workers. I've got our director of HR, Jessica Arbie, here, and we're going to talk about some really interesting stuff related to final payrolls. Hey, Jess, what's going on?
Hey, Colin. How are you?
Good. Glad to have you back, a frequent guest here on the podcast for all things compliance, HR, legal related. So when I say final payrolls, a lot of people may not know what that means.
Yep.
So what am I talking about when I say final payrolls? What does that even mean for if I'm a staffing agency?
Right. So it applies to staffing agencies, but it also applies to every other employer in the whole United States. Whenever an employee separates from the employer, they're terminated, whether it's voluntary, involuntary. Depending on what state that employee is located in, where the work is being done, there may be accelerated final pay laws that come into play. So as a staffing agency, it can be really hard if we're finding out a little bit later than we should have, that there's a termination coming up. If there are different, it varies from state to state. So you could, be looking at one as extreme as like California, where if it's an involuntary termination, it's same day pay. That they're being terminated, they must receive their pay on that same day. Versus some states that, really don't have a lot of rules behind it. They're just kind of silent on it. So essentially you would just be paying on their last normal payday. Federal law doesn't really speak to it. They're just, more along the lines of you need to make sure that people are being paid on regular intervals and, that they get paid on their regular paydays. And they just say, defer to your state specific laws because there are a lot of
state specific laws.
there's a lot of
Yeah.
variation, and there's a lot of states that have, rules for voluntary and then a different rule for involuntary termination. So, you want to make sure that you're working with a payroll provider or somebody who has that kind of information kind of baked into your software. For us, it's very helpful that, we have that kind of in there, baked in, and, going with the flow to help us recognize that when that's happening.
So yeah, just so to like really take it high level here, if somebody were to hear something about final pay rules, right? What we're really talking about are final pay rules are state-specific laws that require employers to pay workers that they terminate within a certain period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Or they would be subject to some type of penalty or extra amount for those workers. And really what those laws are designed to do is to prevent employers from withholding pay from workers for any number of reasons, disputes, returning of equipment, anything that would cause an employer to try to like punitively not pay their people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if you don't know about those can be very risky to your business, either financially or legally if people were to make claims, especially for, staffing agencies, can really hurt your profitability. So I guess since they're state specific, where do final pay rules apply? Like what states are we talking about?
Mm-hmm. So there are about 21 states that are in these kind of accelerated final pay rules category. Alaska, Arkansas, Arizona, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Washington, D.C., Hawaii, Idaho, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Missouri, Montana, New Hampshire, New Mexico, Nevada, Oregon, South Carolina. It goes on.
Yeah.
So
like half the country, basically.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah, half the country has it.
Yeah.
So let's start with the other half, though. Like for those states that don't have it, you just pay your worker on the next pay. Like if there's no accelerated pay rule, what do you do as an employer in those states?
Right. Yep. So the practice then would be to follow the normal next pay, on the schedule for that person so that there's still no delay. I mean, you should never have a delay in your frequency of how you pay your employees. And so you would just follow that same pattern on their final.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So you just, hey, next payroll, you'll get paid. We don't have to do anything, earlier or anything like that. But for these other states, these 21, there's some type of accelerated pay rule that you want to be aware of? Some are more difficult than others. So I know that it's about half the country. Are there any localities that are like more difficult or maybe more accelerated or higher risk than others?
Yeah. So I think with the ones that have an accelerated pay for final or for involuntary terminations, so whenever an employee is let go involuntarily, those are the states that seem to be the hardest, and that would be like California,
Yep.
Colorado, Connecticut, Hawaii, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Montana, Nevada. Those are the ones that have requirements for the day that the employee is being discharged is the day that they should receive that final pay. That final
Like
pay should be
physically
inclusive.
hand them pay.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And it should be inclusive of their all of their earnings for their hours that they've worked, and also any kind of like PTO payouts or anything that should be treated as wages that they've earned should be paid out on that day.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's pretty difficult, especially if you're working in like a remote setting, right? Like either you are not like if you're a staffing firm, right? You're not physically located where the worker is in a lot of instances. You're
Mhm.
not at the work site because they're obviously at a third party client. Or if they work remotely, which a lot of staffing firms we work with place remote talent, um, physically handing them a check is going to be very difficult because you're not close to them, right? And especially with COVID and people going remote, like it just makes it very hard. So some instances people have to do same day pay, which you got to get work with the bank, or you can physically mail them a check overnight, right? Like that might actually help as well. But it makes it really difficult. Those types of settings are hard, but this is mostly applying to involuntary terms. Let's just define that, right? Right? Like what qualifies as an involuntary term?
Yeah. Yeah, so if, I would say, so at first thinking in terms of a voluntary termination, that would be where the employee is telling you that they are ending their employment, whether it's the same day or they're giving you advance notice, that's a voluntary separation or termination. If they are being let go based on poor performance or whatever, anything that's kind of adverse, almost like that's one where you would consider this is a situation in that number of states that would require them to be paid out on the same day. So it's important to stay in touch with with the client, to be aware of like how things are going, what's going on, if there is a plan to end an assignment, whether it's just the end of the assignment, that's one thing too. That's still an involuntary termination. It's ending employment with that person. As a staffing
Yeah.
agency, like if you have another job lined up for that person, then you're okay. If you're able to maintain employment with that person and roll them into a new role with a new client, then this is a non-issue in most of those states.
Yep.
But, in a lot of situations, you might not have another job lined up immediately. And so you have to know what you're doing that day whenever that
Got a
person
plan.
is ending. Yes, you have to have
Yeah.
a plan ahead of time and know what you're doing there.
Yep. To avoid these final pay rules or avoid being negatively impacted by them as an employer, staffing firm, you need to have a plan for how terminations are going to be handled, specifically involuntary terminations, whether they're directed by the client, meaning the client wants to do it, or for whatever reason, the staffing firm wants to move on from somebody. So, being in constant communication with that client and knowing that they might want to move on from somebody is super important to planning out how you're going to make sure the final pay law is handled. Because if you don't, then you can have problems from a monetary perspective, a legal perspective that you'll then have to solve for anyways. So can we talk a little bit about that? What are the implications if you aren't able to fully comply with the final pay laws?
Right. So we'll use like California as an example. They're probably one of the most strict, as far as like ensuring that a penalty is immediately realized. So, for example,
Imposed, yeah.
if you're if someone's involuntarily terminated in California and you don't pay them on that final day, it creates waiting time penalties that are payable to the employee on a daily basis until they receive that final pay. So that could go up to 30 days. That's a long time. Hopefully you would have caught that this person was let go before then, but there may be a few days, up to 30 days, where you're on the hook for paying that daily rate of, whatever it is. So it's an average of whatever their rate is and how much they've worked over the life of their employment with you, however many average hours they've worked, and you multiply that and figure out the rate that they should receive on a daily basis until you get their final pay to them.
Yeah. That can be quite a lot, right? So like if you think about it from somebody making $25 an hour, if they average 8 hours a day and you did end up not paying them for 30 days for whatever reason, your cost would be like roughly $6,000. So on an average like 13-week assignment, that's the average, type of placement length in the staffing business, 90 days or so, $6,000 could be your entire profit margin. Like that could be the entire profit gone. So it's really, really important to get correct. And something that goes without saying for us is sort of just within Foxhire, just the understanding that like the law is imposed to where the work is being performed, right? So just because your company is based in Ohio doesn't mean that like it won't apply to you if you have a worker in California. So if the worker is working in California or one of these states physically located there, that's where, the law will apply. So whatever the law is in that locality is what you need to be aware of. Doesn't matter if your company's based elsewhere.
Exactly.
So that's financially, right? So there's a number of different variations of those like financial risks, right? How they calculate the number, how many days is it, a 30-day penalty? Is it just 72 hours? Like there's a number of different variations to that in these different states. I think, California, Massachusetts, and Washington are probably the most difficult out of the more difficult states. But what other risks might people be exposed to if this happens? Not just financially, but complaints from the worker to different authorities. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah. So, the whole issue of pay, could fall under any kind of wage and hour complaint or dispute that an employee might have with an employer. So, that's why it's really important for employers to know what the rules are in the states that they're employing people. But, if you do find that something went wrong, an employee could file a complaint, or you might not even have caught it yourself, and you find, oh, here now I have an employee that's complained about this to the Department of Labor in their state, or the Department of, Industrial Relations, like in California. So you may end up with, something coming in from the Department of Labor saying that this was handled incorrectly and they're starting an investigation. And, if there are findings that you handled it incorrectly, or that they were not paid timely, even in, say, for the states where they have penalties that are imposed immediately, versus some of the states, it's not immediate. It's going to be potentially caught later through something like an investigation like this. So it's not going to happen up front like it does in some states. It's going to be something that's caught later, maybe even years later. Who knows?
Yeah,
So
that would be
just
unfortunate.
yeah, right. So, just knowing what to expect and how to respond, and things like that if something like that were to come up. But yeah, I mean, non-compliance, it just opens you up to any kind of claims like that.
Yeah, it's similar to like it's similar to the independent contractor compliance. There's multiple different entities within the government that would care about it, right? With independent contractor compliance, it's Department of Labor and IRS. Same can apply here. Different entities within the government organizations could have a stake in why they think you did something wrong and investigate you and all that type of stuff. So it's super important to try and avoid that as much as possible. And the biggest thing to help you avoid these types of situations with final pay rules is to communicate effectively with your client, know when involuntary terminations are coming, know the rule in that locality so that you can get payroll out on time. And then, use technology to your advantage, right? If you are able to send payroll quickly through either an employer of record partner or some type of other technology, that is good, right? That's good to solve a lot of these problems, is to get these workers paid and figure out everything else on the back end once you're able to, get them the money that they need. So very important thing, very, very small thing in the whole process of staffing. That's why a lot of people don't really think about it, maybe even know about it, but can be a big problem if you don't do it correctly. So if you are looking to do staffing business, just another thing to think about in the back office to ensure you do right. Because if you don't, you have some big problems with it. So happy to talk about this more. If you guys have questions about that, please feel free to reach out to us. Jess and her team are fighting this battle every day, trying to execute these processes and comply with the law every day on behalf of our clients. We do a really great job at that. That is our profession here at Fox Hire, being an employer of record. So would love to help you guys if you have questions. Otherwise, we hope you found this valuable. Please, subscribe and watch us on the next one. And we'll see you later. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jess.